Hello, and you are listening to Eco Justice Radio, a project of SoCal 350 Climate Action. Our show presents environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Eco Justice Radio acknowledges that we record the show on the traditional territory of the Tongva and all of their relatives. Welcome, I am Jessica Aldridge. On today's show, Tiny Living, Right-Sizing Our American Dream, I will be interviewing Lindsay Wood, known also as Tiny Home Lady, and Theresa Bradley, founding director of Race to Zero Waste. Lindsay Wood, the Tiny Home Lady, is on a mission to develop 100,000 tiny homes as attainable and affordable houses in California and across the U.S. Lindsay has been investing in real estate since 2015 and believes tiny homes are a solution to the housing and climate crisis. Lindsay consults and guides people dreaming of going tiny through the Go Tiny Academy, Go Tiny Showcase, and the Go Tiny VIP tours. Theresa Bradley is the founding director of Race to Zero Waste and lives with her partner, daughter, and cat, who all live a low-waste lifestyle while traveling most of the year in a 24-foot Class C motorhome. She and her partner travel for environmental project work throughout California and showcase their lifestyle on their Instagram and YouTube channel called Tiny Green Adventure. As house prices escalate, the concept of living in a smaller home has gone viral. Whether fixed to land or portable, the tiny house movement has swept across the United States. Yet, what is the day-to-day reality of living the downsized life? Our guests this week, Lindsay Wood, also known as the Tiny Home Lady, and Theresa Bradley from Tiny Green Adventures, bring a dose of reality to the challenge, but also the splendor of living simply with very few belongings in a tiny home. Can you really save money by going tiny? Is it a net positive for the environment? And what about zero waste? Is that possible? Are tiny homes the way to tackle the housing crisis across the United States? Tiny homes, although lauded as a green way forward in a world covered in wasteful McMansions and debt-enslaving rent payments, must overcome land and building regulations that in many places still consider this form of housing either illegal or difficult to approve. We go into all these points and more on today's show. Thank you for tuning in to Eco Justice Radio and our show, Tiny Living, Right-Sizing Our American Dream. I am your host, Jessica Aldridge, and it is my honor to welcome our guests, Lindsay Wood, known also as the Tiny Home Lady, and Theresa Bradley, founding director of Race to Zero Waste. Welcome to Eco Justice Radio. Welcome, Lindsay and Theresa.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to have you.
Thank you. An honor. Thank you.
I am very much interested in learning more about tiny living. The visibility and the popularity of tiny living has greatly increased over the past 10 years plus, more than 10 years. Lindsay, I'm going to start with a lot of questions for you first. Let's start with the definition of tiny living. Can you explain what is meant by tiny living?
Well, we all have our own answers, but my answer is tiny living is this cross-section of living with less in a tinier space. And when I say tiny, the regular housing in America is about 2,500 square feet or more. So there leaves a lot of room for reduction of that house size. So I always kind of say, anything 1,000 square feet is going back to the 1950s era, when literally 1,000 square feet is where 4 people in a family lived in that very comfortably. And so, the interesting thing is tiny home, which really kind of emanated out of the word tiny living, is really a marketing term, because tiny homes can be a van, they can be a school bus, they can be a shipping container, they can be on wheels, they can be on foundation. But back to that, desire to reduce and also live in a smaller space is really what I consider tiny living.
And what's the difference between tiny living that's mobile, movable, and those that are permanent?
There is a major movement here about building off-site. So really that, the on-site building has been going on for decades and decades. In fact, we know it so well. There's been a little bit of off-site building in the recreational vehicle industry and in the manufactured home industry, which we used to call mobile homes. Now they're called manufactured homes. But now we're actually seeing the move of regular homes that are built in a factory, probably under 1,000 square feet. They could be more because they could come in different sections, and then brought to the site on wheels and then placed on foundation. So there's really an on-site build and an off-site build. And we really like to call that factory built, prefab, any of those kind of words that we often hear in relation to homes that are built off-site. And that's really the big direction and opportunity that housing has, because we need more houses across the country, if not the planet.
And we're going to talk about that and accessibility later in the show. So people stay tuned. I would assume that tiny living has a net positive for the environment, but how so?
Yeah, so the cool thing right away, you're building with a smaller footprint is smaller and less materials. So with less materials, less, 2x4s, if you're building with steel, any of that, is a wonderful application for reduction of all that energy that goes into making all those building materials. You're most likely going to still have the bathroom elements, the kitchen elements with the refrigerator, maybe a dishwasher, microwave, oven range, but they're going to be in a smaller footprint. And so when you do that, you also reduce the heating and cooling. That's probably the biggest one, right? So if you're living in 400 square feet, or if you're living in 4,000 square feet, and you have the type of system that heats the whole home up, whether it's small or big, you're going to be heating and pumping a lot more heating or cooling into the home, which generates pollution. So it's just less is more.
From what you have told me, our previous conversations before this interview, that there are three pillars of going tiny when it comes to your living situation. And those are land, building, and finance. And I want to break down each of these, what they mean, their importance, and what we should be considering. And it seems, I would think, that the land and the building pillars seem to go hand in hand. At a high level, what are the elements regarding land and building standards that one must consider when considering tiny living?
Wonderful question. And to back up a little bit as to how I got into this, is our builder went out of business in the middle of our build. We went from a custom build to a surprise DIY and learned a ton through that experience. Fast forward, 2 or 3 years later, after we had lived in our own home and traveled, really started getting the idea of maybe I could help other people go through this whole tiny home process and help them avoid what we went through. I mean, for sure, builder going out of business was not anything anyone wants. But other things came into my understanding. So over time, I kept seeing these similar patterns. It was like, all right, you got to check off the box for the land. Where are you going to place it? For who's going to build it? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be DIY, custom, all those things? And then what does your finance situation look like? Are you going to use full cash? Are you going to use partial cash and need more financing? Or do you need, how much do you need? And we really get into the conversation. You could ask a question, well, how much are you looking to spend? Will determine what kind of builder they're going to go with, right? I know builders that can build as low as in the $20,000 range. And I just talked to at least 3 builders that have built $230,000 tiny homes. So it's all possible. It's all about the materials, right? Behind me, if we've got standing, or what do you call it, the shiplap, if I choose a product that was lesser, then it'd be less cost. But I went with the shiplap because I like that feature. So that land, the build, the finance will also determine which builder you're going with. Because if you want financing and banks aren't really offering financing on all the different products that we have out there in tiny homes, then you're going to need to find a certain builder. It's very different than if you get a regular mortgage, you go and look for a bank or a mortgage broker and you get that loan. In the tiny home world, if you're buying to a certain building standard, you're going to need to find the builder or dealer that sells a home that also offers financing. So right there, that's the connection before we even get into land.
Well, yeah, land. I mean, what about zoning? What's allowed? Is there a specific size requirement? Do some states allow certain things where others don't? What has to be considered?
Yes, yes, and yes. So one of the things we never learned in school was all this, building standards and zoning laws. And usually, but what's funny is everyone that lives in a home has either some type of zoning, which has everything to do with the land. So zoning laws have to do with the land, where you live. It's going to be a city or a county. Yes, it's the state you live in, but it's the city or county, and they call that a jurisdiction or the local enforcement agency. Two of those words are kind of like the things that say, okay, what will my city or county allow me to do? Now, if you're in deep rural Tennessee or downtown San Francisco, right, you're going to have a different zoning reality. Then there's the building standard. Think about, everything that's related to the building and how the building is built. And that building standard and the zoning law have to talk to each other, because that's what's really already been going on with all this on-site building. And now we're doing things where we build things off-site, want to bring it to the land and hope that it works out, especially if you want to get permits and be seen by your local jurisdiction, your utilities, your electrical, your water, your sewer system or septic. All those things are usually very much required as part of a permit. And the one question you had, which is very specific to zoning, and this is where I see a lot of people get tripped up. They get very excited. They see a plot of land, 1 acre, and you want a whopping 400 square foot home, no problem, right? Tons of space. But if that city or county, that jurisdiction requires you to have a minimum of 500 square feet as a primary residence because there's no structure there already, now your 400 square feet is about 100 feet square shy. So there's things to understand about the land and the building standard. And that's really what I teach all of my students inside the academy.
And some of it's legal sometimes to have movable homes or not, like the mobility of the home can be a legality situation as well.
Yes. So that's been a major one. Early days, my friend Jay Schaefer, just to give a little sketch of where this all came from, lived in an RV in the middle of winter in Iowa. He was pumping a ton of heating into that RV because RVs are known to have thin walls. The beauty of an RV, and Theresa's going to definitely talk a little bit more about the mobile lifestyle. The beauty of that is that it's portable, it's lightweight, it reduces, miles per gallon and all of those things. But when you're sitting there in a field in Iowa with snow all around you and it's 10 below, that's when your structure would love to be a little bit thicker. And that's where he had the vision of going with a thicker wall, but still having it portable to be able to move it, especially if you don't own the land below you. So with all of that, we've got to think about ways to connect the people with the land and the people with the tiny home.
And is there anything else on finance that you want to mention before we move on?
Yeah, so the financing, the big deal is really which building standard you're going to. There's 2 RV standards. That's probably the area where people can get into them easiest, but the financing really relates to that building standard that you're building to, your builder's going to build to. So super important to understand the zoning law and the building standard. And I've definitely got, resources. Hard to go into all the details here in this moment, but that's what I do as a consultant in really guiding people through their process.
So people can look you up and get the
Yes.
information and take your class, your tiny home living class. And if they're really interested in this. And before we go to break, we got a few more minutes before we go to break. How did the tiny living movement start and why?
It started with my buddy Jay. There he was in Iowa. He gave it at least a visual. But the good news is there was already this big passion towards sustainability, to reducing our stuff and having a simpler lifestyle. We came from, I don't know about you, but I was like a child of the 70s and 80s. It was like, go big or go home, right? More, go shopping, all that. Did that make us happier? No. We've got we have hoarding movies in this country. So we've literally gone, the opposite end. And now I feel like we're coming back. There's more desire to live more sustainable, more awareness around just our outside space. And the big one, dollar signs. Big houses cost more money. Smaller houses cost less money, unless you put a lot of the finishes into them. So really on average, the tiny home movement got started with a lot of different directions. But my buddy Jay Schaefer and a number of people that came after him gave it the shape and the form with at least what we call the tiny home.
We're talking about the American dream, right? And so there's this, you know, we're supposed to be able to have a house. That's what we've been told, that we're supposed to buy a house, have a picket fence, all of that. But there's this lack of home ownership because of the lack of being able to achieve that American dream, that, the missing middle. Do you feel that tiny living can help in, achieving, I guess, that American dream? And then also, is it a possible solution for the housing crisis that we're experiencing across the country?
Yes, yes, and yes. And here's the cool part. We're revising the American dream of a big home because there's a number of people that have come to me. The reason why they want to go tiny, they've cleaned the home, they've paid for the electricity, heat it and cool it, and they're tired, right? They're ready to say, no, we don't need that much. Plus, if you talk to anyone that I have one of my clients, she goes, I just practiced what part of my home that I really needed to live in, the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. Some of her 2 rooms, she never even walked in for months. Other people was like, oh, just my cats use that room. So clearly, there's a new revision of an American dream that is possible. And absolutely, we do not have enough space to sprawl, that which adding more roads, more pollution, vehicle miles driven, all of those things. In addition to that, the whole going up that blocks sunlight from other people. And so we have this opportunity to infill. There are so many houses out there with backyards. I always think about it like turn that grass into something different, right? Make it active, make it, whether it's making money or giving a loved one a house. The opportunity is there. And that takes a whole impact of economics of our housing crisis. And it starts adding more opportunity of building more houses and creating more spaces.
Well, we're going to take a break, come right back, continue this conversation. I want to know if you feel that the movement is accessible, or is this really a white dominated industry? And I also want to hear from Teresa and the life you've been living in your mobile tiny home. So everyone stay tuned and we'll continue the conversation in a moment. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. We air every Friday at 4 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles and Sundays at 4 p.m. on KPFT Houston. Stay connected by subscribing to Eco Justice Radio on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org. You can check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today you are listening to Tiny Living, Right-Sizing Our American Dream with host Jessica Aldridge and guests Lindsay Wood, known as Tiny Home Lady, and Theresa Bradley, founding director of Race to Zero Waste. Lindsay, we just spoke about before the break how tiny living could be one of the solutions to the housing crisis and how it could help to make up that missing middle. I want to talk about accessibility. Do you feel that the tiny home movement is diverse, or do you feel that this is more of a white dominated movement and industry? And what needs to happen to make it more accessible? And where do you see those opportunities for change?
I definitely feel it's white dominated. I'm not going to lie. It just happens to be the people that I've seen start it, look like me, have skin color like me. However, the good news is that's changing. And the opportunity for change really comes down to housing completely turned upside down. So our whole we mentioned earlier in the call about zoning, just this word that now is like part of our vernacular. That really came from this thing called redlining. And where that came from was absolute racism in regards to housing. They would literally draw a red line in areas on the map where people of color, low economics, all that, usually by freeways or, busy roads. No surprise, the projects are certain areas, mobile home parks, certain areas, but surely not up in the beautiful hills. I'm thinking of like Oakland, for example. You're going to have a lot more density and industry near the freeways. And you're going to have also housing mixed in there too. But up in the hills, you're not going to find a mobile home park. Okay. It's not going to happen. So we have to look at history of how housing was designed and what role racism played. Because I think it was in the 30s, The wonderful city of Berkeley that we know is such a progressive city was actually the birthing place of single family zoning as we know it, because a Black group of people wanted to put in a dance hall, and people got pretty quickly figuring out how to create this thing we call a single family zone, meaning one family home per lot. And that really was the birth of zoning or redlining and all that birthed out of it. So to kind of unwind and figure out how to apply it now, if we create more infill, people can live anywhere. People of all kinds of means can live there. And now what we create is a lot more diversity, which has been lacking to the levels that we have no idea have affected us negatively. So now we get to see that, interaction, and not just whiteifying neighborhoods for sure. I'm aware of it because I grew up in a lot of those neighborhoods. So now that I see the opportunity for infill housing to also be the diversity housing, the housing crisis solution, as well as climate solution, yay, on all three accounts.
And I would even venture to say that, given wealth disparity, given racism, that maybe the concept of tiny living, as an industry, as a marketing term, prior to that, living tiny was something that was forced upon people because of their wealth disparity. And so almost taking this concept of what people were forced to do and now making it popularized and sexy and fun, but it was something that was forced upon people.
It's true. I think about the story. So this is classic. Hayes Valley, San Francisco, super funky, crime ridden, artists lived there, the whole thing. It became hip because artists live there, people that were not just following a certain gentrification. I was very much part of the anti-gentrification movement in San Francisco. So when I think about how neighborhoods like that start off crunchy and groovy and artistic and all that, and then they become gentrified because the hipsters live there, and then all of a sudden the prices go up and now no longer the artists can live there and they go find the next place that then becomes the next popular. It's crazy like that. Well, now let's just embed the whole cultural vibe amongst each other and see how that goes. Because we surely have tried this other method for so many decades, and it is not proven to be successful, from crime to, the way people feel, the way they've been treated, all the things. So it's time.
It's time. In Los Angeles and other cities around the country, we've seen the build out of what is considered tiny home villages for people who might be without permanent housing. What are your thoughts regarding tiny home villages, and are there some projects that you feel are important?
I'm 100% a fan of these villages that provide people that are otherwise unhoused to be housed safely, securely, all the things that they need. Tents are tough. You can rip through a tent. Tents are not as strong as a structure. One thing though I'm noticing is the optics of like tiny home village. Well, you got tiny homes that are $100,000 and you got tiny homes that are more of like shelter where they don't have a kitchen and the bathroom. There's like 6 things that make it a habitable dwelling unit. There's the cooking, the sanitation, the sleeping, the bathrooms, the kitchen, all the things, being able to make food. So if you don't have the bathroom or the kitchen, maybe you have that as a community center. You've got a community bathhouse, and you've got wraparound services to provide people that otherwise may have mental health challenges, drug addiction, all of those things, which are not surprising to me living on the street. That would not be easy. I've never tried it. All I've done, is camp, right? When it comes to a tent, but not to live in it and to be able to be functional. That has not been my experience. So to provide people the shelter that we need is actually going to be more helpful for reducing all the costs of people ending up in hospitals. There's a lot of cost to actually, helping people out that are living on the street. So to give them that shelter, then you go a little bit further. Let's say we go from the shelter that has wraparound services community center to their own tiny home where you actually have your own bathroom, your own kitchen, kind of like a progression towards owning your own home. And that I think is going to be some of the best aspects. We've got veterans on the street. I mean, I'm sorry, but they give their service and they end up on the street. No, that's unacceptable. And so to actually provide them with a shelter, provide them with the services they need, and then, see them evolving. My friend does this amazing program with veterans and rescuing wolves and really connecting the wolf pack and the veterans together with tiny homes. So there's all kinds of solutions out there. We just need to keep applying them and connecting and collaborating.
Yeah. Even older youth coming out of foster care system, as other options.
I know two organizations, one in Colorado and one in Los Angeles, that are unbelievable, doing that exact work with tiny homes for youth that are aging out, because oftentimes they'll have a rough go of it just being, and then they'll be like, bye-bye. What life skills have they been given, right? What extra help? So having an infill, like one of the ideal things is to have a home in the backyard of a single family home. So there's a family connected, but they're adults, they're separated, but to actually just have a family to be there to connect with. Maybe there's some work trade that the new youth that's there could end up doing gardening work, or just helping with babysitting. All kinds of things can now start creating more of that family that the youth may not have ever had.
I want to bring Teresa into this conversation. Teresa and I have worked together in the zero waste world. For those that listen to the show, know that I'm also in the waste industry for my 9 to 5. Teresa, you and your family are currently living in a tiny home, traveling the road, which you document through your account, Tiny Green Adventure. Paint us a picture of your family's living situation.
Oh, I wish I could do tours of it. I wish I could paint the picture and have people come into our very tiny space. So, yes, we are a family of three, plus we have a cat who was actually a stray cat at one point in time. Her name's Luna, and she adjusted well. We get a lot of questions about the cat, honestly, because of such a tiny space. When I say such a tiny space, we're a 24-foot Class C RV, a motorhome that you can drive. And for all you like data nerds or folks that really want to know what that breaks down to, Lindsay was talking about this earlier in the program. 24 square feet is is roughly 192 square feet. So the size of a box truck, if you think of a U-Haul box truck. And it also has what's called a slide. So one slide that actually can go out, and we push a button and all of a sudden we magically have this beautiful queen size bed. So we did it out of necessity, actually out of a need. We used to live in the San Francisco Bay Area in San Francisco, and we moved in 2014. And we did purchase a house, and we decided to live our American dream. And we were founders of a nonprofit called Race to Zero Waste, which is a California nonprofit. So we were living in Pittsburgh and we had good jobs. And then the pandemic hit, and we're watching all these YouTube videos. And Lindsay, and also just, like you said, we're in the waste industry. I've known Lindsay for a long time. I followed her and I was following other folks. And what they said was, don't overthink it. Start small. And for us, because we do environmental consulting throughout California, we were get up and go people. Like we have to get up and go quickly. A fifth wheel is too big for us. We have parked our RV successfully in San Francisco proper, which is totally fine because of the size of what we have. But it's been such an epic journey. And now I'm talking to people, they're actually like calling, and they're interested in bringing their families to do the RV life, like renting an RV, for example, to see what it's all about. Because for us, we work together, not only in this small space. My partner, he works for Race to Zero Waste as well, and he's in the field. And then I'm in this, we call it the mobile office. So I'm in this space, homeschooling, we call it road schooling, actually, our daughter. She's 5. And then, the cat and myself. And I could say we do the 9 to 5, but honestly, we're so busy lately, but we're just like it's kind of a constant thing. But the RV life has actually helped us expand our reach, expand our services to do. We do a lot of waste characterization studies, and we've done some in LA. We've been able to partner with other firms and the Central Valley up north. And it's very exciting. But to kind of paint that picture, for us, Lindsay mentioned this a little bit. For some people, it's about sustainability. It is that. But also for us was we got rid of everything. It was about being minimal. That was our main goal, was to like live a minimal lifestyle. And we've achieved that in the past year and a half. So
Teresa, you mentioned your nonprofit Race to Zero Waste. You are a zero waste professional, as we talked about, and you focus on consulting and events and helping people reduce and businesses reduce their footprint. So, how do you maintain a lesser waste footprint while living in an RV?
yeah, that's a very good question. And we actually get a lot of tips and tricks from other folks on Instagram doing something similar. I'll be honest, on the road it's very tough. So even if we're buying from local farmers markets, we're buying for recyclability, buying for less plastic, it's still the infrastructure, honestly, at RV parks. And it's something that as a nonprofit, we do want to address, not just in California, right? California has a lot of laws, mandatory recycling, in some cities, composting. We're finding that the Bay Area is pretty good when we go outside the Bay Area. Just even recycling is sometimes even finding trash is a challenge. So for us, really living that minimal lifestyle has been a huge benefit because there aren't a lot of services that are out there. One of the big things is for us is to reduce our footprint in terms of the water that we use. So the average person, I've been told, uses, or family uses, roughly 30 gallons of water per day. And the RV life, and we did it for a year and a half, pretty much nonstop. Visited family here and there for a week or two at a time. We went through about 40 every 5 days, 40 gallons. So when you look at that, that's just a huge part of reducing our footprint, not just the waste side, but there's also the water side and energy. Lindsay mentioned this a little bit. So we're on propane. We do hook up to the electric grid here and there. But yeah, propane is said to be a bit cleaner than utilizing gas. We actually don't drive as much as we did at one point, and that was something that we were really looking at and committed to. When you look at a motor home, even the one that we have, it's roughly 12 miles per gallon. So it's not good or efficient in that respect. But for us to be flying back and forth, we made this decision to move forward with a motorhome because we were told that, and over time, and I've done some research that like even doing that is a benefit for a family of three instead of flying back and forth, that the miles per gallon in terms of the ecological footprint is less.
Did you find something to be what was your biggest challenge? And what maybe proved to be easier than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, I think honestly, because the space is so small, that was our biggest concern. So we said that we were going to do it for 1 year, at least 1 year, no matter what. We set a date and we did it, and we did it beyond a year. And we still have our RVs called Tiny. I recommend if you have a home, a tiny home, it's just classic, you name it. So Tiny is our motor home, and like I said, we still have Tiny. We were looking at selling Tiny at one point, but it's been such a huge part of our lives that, and it's gotten us to be able to not just see different parts of the country and the world, but I mean the country, but it's really got us to expand our reach. So the biggest part was the challenge was living in a small space. And I think that was like in our head. We had it in our head. And also like that it was going to be a huge challenge. But I encourage folks, if they are interested in the van life, the RV life, living tiny, and you have and you're able to do it, maybe it is renting, from somebody else, a family or friend that has one. Really see if it's something that you could do it. We've been together for a long time. We know what sets us off, our quirks and all that. And it actually brought us closer together as a family, believe it or not. We actually started we thought we were going to fight a bunch and there was going to be all these issues, but when it came down to it, we were sitting outside, making s'mores and not watching the TV. We really unplugged when it was our downtime. And so it's been actually an eye-opening experience for us in terms of that. So we proved ourselves wrong.
I think it's beautiful. I mean, I could imagine. I don't know if I would want tiny living for myself, but living with other people might be be a lot. It's a lot to deal with, and you learn what you're able to put up with real quick.
Yep, that is correct.
Teresa, people that might be interested in living the RV life may not be aware of some of these challenges that we've been talking about, right? It's things that they may have not considered. And it seems like that, as Lindsay was saying, it seems like it would be more affordable than being homebound. But as you also mentioned, there are things like gasoline and propane that do cost a lot of money. What should people consider when considering this type of lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And one thing that we looked at intimately, especially parking, when you look at the state of California and just the cost of gasoline, it's, a dollar or two more a gallon. One of the biggest things that we decided to do was we have two budgets. I highly recommend if anyone's out there that is really interested in doing this, there are a lot of folks out there that you can watch YouTube videos on looking at a budget. Some say you need at least $2,000 a month. Some say more. It depends on your lifestyle. So I just recommend that. So I actually wrote two budgets. So I have one for the nonprofit and then one's a personal budget. I will admit that we went over the personal budget in a lot of ways, not just because of gas, we weren't driving, but the cost to park an RV. So you can do a lot of things and Lindsay can talk to this maybe a little bit, to be inexpensive. A lot of people look at BLM lands, the Bureau of Land Management. So they may stay on that. But for us, like, we had the nomad internet and everything. It just wasn't really working out for us. Like, I need to be able to work remotely. We also have a 5-year-old, and for us, safety is a big concern. And there's not saying anything against, staying in remote places, but we decided to write our budget to be able to include RV parks and even the nonprofit to acquire some of that. So I think there is a misconception out there that, if you sell your house and you downsize, that getting out on the road, there's going to be this huge cost savings. It really depends on yourself. There's some people that really enjoy eating out almost every night. And when you're in an RV that's that tiny, like that we're in, we do enjoy, eating out, but those are things that are costly. And so I just recommend people to really look at your finances and what you can afford. And sometimes like actually like double that. And Lindsay might have more advice on that, but we were shocked, but not so much because living in the Bay Area, but I know a lot of people that were traveling all over. And if you look at a lot of the bloggers or the vloggers and the people on YouTube, they don't do it in California. We're pretty much exclusive in California. So we're a bit of an anomaly, and it can be quite expensive, but renting an apartment in San Francisco is just unattainable for us at this point. So when we look at what we're spending $1,850 for a month, which some people would say, like in the Midwest, that is absolutely crazy to park a recreational vehicle on. I would say actually that was what I was paying in 2013-14. And I'm never, ever going to get an apartment in San Francisco. I may be able to in certain parts for $1,800 a month. So it's paid off. It's actually a benefit for the organization. And it's also like, it makes sense for us.
Well, I'm going to go to a break real quick. I'm going to ask Lindsay her thoughts on that as well, because I know that you had something to say in regards to what people should consider. And then I want to talk about, the environmental beneficial life, how this is environmentally beneficial to the lifestyle, and continue the conversation. So hold tight, everyone, and we'll be right back. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. We air every Friday at 4 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles and Sundays at 4 p.m. on KPFT Houston. Stay connected by subscribing to Eco Justice Radio on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org. You can check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today you are listening to Tiny Living, Right-Sizing Our American Dream with host Jessica Aldridge and guests Lindsay Wood, known as Tiny Home Lady, and Theresa Bradley, founding director of Race to Zero Waste. We were just talking with Theresa Bradley about the RV life and things that people should consider, some of the challenges that come with this lifestyle. And Lindsay, I think you wanted to add to that conversation.
Yeah, so I love how Teresa said we're a bit of an anomaly because they travel through California and many of the other, nomads. Once you travel through California and take a little bite of that, fuel price, you quickly look at other states. Right now I'm in Arizona and diesel is 4.19. I'm like, yes, score. Right. So I'm always making sure like, okay, if I'm going to California from Arizona, I fill up right at the edge of that state and make sure that I take into California that less expensive fuel. What I will say in terms of tiny homes, because I'm a bit of a unicorn, we got into our tiny home, which is 32 feet long, 8.5 wide, 300 square feet. This is the second bedroom behind me, right? The other bedroom's across the way and it's a loft. So it's a pretty big home. Think of your really big fifth wheel, because ours is like a gooseneck that attaches into the back of the truck. Well, we had those RV fees that we would pay for. We also had solar. So we put a lot more into off-grid capability to be more like an RV. But you're not going to be more like, you're not going to be hanging out for weeks on end with only a 20-gallon water tank, which is what we put into our home. You're going to have to refill that. So we did get it down to like 6 gallons a day. That was crazy. That was not a bath. And I did have a bathtub. And there was one moment where I came home and my husband, bless his heart, carrying water, made me a bath. So there was like those special treats that were happening on the road because our home does come with a bathtub. So what we really find though in this industry is 99.9% of people that want the bigger home like ours are going to have it to be portable, but they're not likely going to move it. Then you get into the question of, do I do it permanent or do I go with, an actual one with wheels and built to more of an RV standard? So the thing that a lot of people don't really know about or think about too much is what Teresa really highlighted is the cost it's going to be for the land. If you already buy the home, that's one cost, right? Then what about being able to be portable? Let's just take a traveling nurse. This is a really good one because they're going to travel for their profession, but they're going to likely stay put for 3 to 6 months or more. But that's usually like under a year. So then they have to think about, well, how much money do I pay for, a rental? So the tiny home works really well because they're already used to being mobile. But you do have that cost, whether it's nightly. One way to reduce that is to get into the monthly. Another way is to get into more of like a long-term contract where you're really staying there for a longer time. 30 days or more is usually going to give you a lower price. For example, the place I'm in right now, $75 a night. Unless you're in for 30 days, then you're $40 a night. That's a big chunk of money in a month, right? So what I like to talk about with people that are like paying high rent somewhere or even paying regular rent, and if they can even take half of that amount and now own that part with their tiny home cost and the other part they pay for their land, that's really going to depend on where they want to live. San Diego in California, $1,000 a month for land prices. And some people like maybe from other parts of the country might look at that and go, oh my God, that's a lot. That's actually not that much if you look at California rates. So it really depends on your values also as to like owning the home, maybe portability, the ability to place at different places, whatever the reason may be, having home ownership, even a portion of that part that normally usually spent to rent and just going to someone else's American dream. So those are just some things to be aware of as you dive into the world of living tiny.
And Teresa had mentioned some of the environmentally friendly and beneficial, benefits that you get from this lifestyle. And, in regards, both of you were talking about the water, the less water waste, the analysis of flying versus it being an RV, gas usage, energy usage, that sort of thing. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to that list, Lindsay?
Definitely in the realm of you just are more aware of what you, in terms of your space, you don't have a lot of space for like, I'm going to go shopping. Like my closet is this big. I don't need more things. And the things that I do have are really going to be higher quality. That's what I found, was a big driving factor. Like I want, I do want different pants and clothes, but if someone was to look at my closet, they're like, oh, no, 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 no. Like my mom, no way could she do my closet. I look at my closet, it's huge in our tiny home because it has the things that I need in it. But if you compare that to, the regular Americana world, it is tiny, tiny. So that's a big one right there. Gas mileage and all that, because of wanting to travel, I will say there is a definite reduction in if I was going to do that trip and fly and rent a car and do all the things versus take my tiny home there. And yes, there is that fuel usage and then park there for 6 months. There's also this amazing opportunity of getting to know an area. I just moved to Prescott, Arizona, never lived here before, and we're going to be here for sure through the summer. So it's a great opportunity to actually, embed yourself into a culture, not just like fly in for the weekend and then fly back out. Yes, you can see things, you can, take in things, but really being somewhere for a long period of time really gives you the opportunity to sink into a community and get to know it, make new friends and make a mark.
Question for both of you. What are some of the hardest adjustments to tiny living lifestyle that you've had to make? What were the things that were memorable to you that you had to give up?
Yeah, I alluded to this a little bit before, but was really downsizing. And so when we lived, we call it in the industry sticks and bricks house, the brick and mortar. So it was a little over 1,000 square feet in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it was interesting because when we purchased the house, the furniture came with it, but just over time, it was like, where'd all this stuff come from? Right? The accumulation. And so that was actually, it took us an entire month to really downsize all of our stuff. And even after that, after we did it for a year and a half, we started the RV eventually made it back to the state of Missouri, and we started removing all the items because we thought we were going to sell it out of it, and we couldn't believe it. Even my father was like, he was floored. He was like, we were literally driving around with like way too much stuff. And it just made us think. And now we've even like pared that down, as Lindsay was mentioning, even more. So, really tiny closet space for a couple people. But I think that's a really big adjustment is just saying goodbye to your stuff. And now, like, there was something that I lost, like an earring that I've loved forever. It really sucked. But now, I got over it in like 5 minutes. I'm like, well, that stinks, but like I just think of things differently now, that it's not about stuff. Life is not about stuff. It's about spending quality time with my family. So yeah, that was a big adjustment.
Lindsay, what was your adjustment?
I can echo that. Oh my goodness. We lived in 500 square feet. It was an apartment, but my husband was into catering. The amount of catering materials we put out. So we did this cool thing for anyone listening. One of the coolest things that we did, and we didn't learn about in a book, we just did it because we needed to. We took 9 truckloads out of that home, moved it up to my parents' home in Ukiah, where they move every summer and winter. They stay, they do by location. So Tucson and Ukiah, California, which is north of San Francisco. In the summers, they're in Ukiah, and in the winters, they're in Tucson. So we had the opportunity to take this big old house. My parents lived in a 2,500 square foot home at that moment. They since have moved into 1,900. So we joke with them and said, "Oh, mom and dad, you went tiny." For them, right? That's how they needed to go tiny. But we took all of that stuff and we had boxes upon boxes. And it just felt very overwhelming, right? You're like, oh, now we have to do all that. We took my parents' dining room table. We put a trucker strap down the middle, the kind that you ratchet down. And we took that down the middle and we take a box. One side would be yes, one side would be no. And we would just do the sorting. There'd be some maybes, but eventually all of it had to go one way or the other. And then the no pile would then get separated into like recycle, donate. We even had a box there was like, oh, it's Christmas time. Let's go bring this to our families and just put the box out and say, we think these are cool things, but we don't need them anymore. I did that with my plants. I did all the things. Actually, the furniture is kind of the easiest one to get rid of. It's all the little bitsy things that, or the massage table that I literally just got rid of 5 years after the starting of this process. So it does take time. We actually got helped by having like storage places in our parents' home to use. So the challenge was not as impactful as maybe what someone else might have. It's just like, you don't want to pay for storage, right? That's just a cost that not everyone wants to incur. That was the biggest one. Second one, and maybe this is the first and the versus swapped, leaving my community. I really felt like the reason why we went tiny is that we were living in Marin County, $100,000 in rent had been spent, and I loved where I lived. I loved the community I lived in. Hiking was amazing. But my God, buying $1 million home that still needed fixing up and updating was not my dream, right? To be tethered to that, really the work that I had to do to pay for that mortgage. I just couldn't. Could not do it. And yet we still wanted home ownership. So that was the direction we went for buying a tiny home. And we wanted to travel. We wanted portability. So, but it was saying goodbye to that amazing community that is still to this day, like, love them, love visiting through Marin. But that was probably my two biggest challenges, downsizing and saying goodbye. And I would say the third one is the mentality around living smaller, trailer, RV park, mobile home park. There's still all that stigma stuff that hopefully, I've got 2 master's degrees and I'm launching my own company as an entrepreneur. I choose this. I actively say yes to this lifestyle because of all the benefits and the people that I've met, the communities and the connections. So, if you're thinking about it, maybe give it a try.
Well, we have a few more minutes till the end of the show, and I want to know what's happening at the legislative level in order to maybe amend some of these ordinances that we've been talking about, allowing movable homes and also understanding what needs to change. And if, Lindsay, if you see this happening anytime soon, if there are shifts that are happening.
Yes, perfect question. How'd you know that right in front of me is this thing called this press release? The International Code Council and the Tiny Home Industry Association initiate standards process to update tiny house requirements. All that blah, 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 blah. What that means in a nutshell is we've got this thing called the International Residential Code, just a little geek out for a moment. What that means is wherever your home is built around the country, unless you're in Wisconsin and it's residential, this is different than commercial. It is built to the International Residential Code. That is the state standard. Some of the codes go a little bit further, like California, where we want to do more on energy efficiency, state of Colorado. But by and large, every state in the country relates or connects to the International Residential Code. They're actually working on and initiating a process to recognize these movable tiny homes that have 2x4 walls. They're built with, far times much better than even some houses that were built in the 60s and 70s. Not nowadays houses, because now you've got more of those building standards they have to build to. But think about maybe an IRC, which is International Residential Code, light, versus what we're really building to is these RV standards, but a big plus. Like some of the RV standards call for an R5 in the wall. That's like a skinny wall. That's a very thin insulation. But then they go further and build like R19. Some of my builders get into like R26. And that's just the thickness of the insulation, the ability to like maintain the heating and cooling inside the home, which is a big impact on our planet. Because of what connects to our energy is pollution, unless you're doing solar and geothermal and all of those products. So the opportunity is abundant for us to go the way of connecting to these building standards that are relatable for real property, but having them also still be on wheels, because the wheels should not be a deterrent. Do you know that I had our tiny home yanked out of the Kincaid fire safely away from harm's way when a whole bunch of houses got burned down? That is a major benefit of a tiny home. Earthquakes, you're on tires. If it's already bumping around, we incur hurricane winds and earthquake conditions every time we drive our tiny home down the road. So there's a lot of opportunities around tiny homes that regular housing just cannot handle because it's stuck to the ground.
So, lastly, where can people follow both of your efforts? Theresa, where can people find you, watch what you're doing, and learn from you?
Yeah, you mentioned this a little bit in the beginning. So we're on Instagram and YouTube under Tiny Green Adventure, Facebook as well, but less active on it. And then Race to Zero Waste, our nonprofit, is race2zerowaste.org. And you can learn more about what we do every day to reduce waste.
Lindsay, where the people find the tiny home lady?
Yes, you can find me at thetinyhomelady.com and also on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Tiny Home Lady, minus the. So at Tiny Home Lady, and on my YouTube channel, Go Tiny TV. Let's go tiny.
Let's go tiny. Well, thank you both of you for coming onto the show, for sharing your knowledge on this very interesting topic. Again, we're going to continue this conversation. Audience members, please join us. Go to ecojusticeradio.org to be able to access those extended interview versions. Thank you so much for being on the show. And yeah, just
Thank you, Jessica.
thank you so
Yeah,
much
thank
for being on the
you.
show. I'm going to do that one more time. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Great to be here. So exciting to share this message of tiny living.
Yeah, it was a really good time. And I actually learned a lot from Lindsay about certain things. So I'm excited to bring that back to my community.
That's great. Thank you to our guests, Lindsay Wood, also known as Tiny Home Lady, and Theresa Bradley, founding director of Race to Zero Waste. And thank you always to our listeners for joining us. This has been Tiny Living, right-sizing our American dream. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media. You can find us at Eco Justice Radio SoCal 350 and Adventures in Waste. And if you like what you heard and you want others to be informed, then you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. A project of SoCal 350 and Adventures in Waste, the show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer Jack Eye, producer and co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.